Here I'm going to go through a quick tutorial of how do you set up your initial export out of Revit into Omniverse and get everything going. So I just have a basic model, and one of the important things to remember is what you see is what you get. So whatever your visibility and graphic settings for three-dimensional elements are here is what you're going to end up with in Omniverse. So that includes the crop box, which I'll show later. Any of the categories that are on, those will all get translated as you see them. So if you don't want anything in Omniverse, just hide it. I typically create an export view specifically for Omniverse. So, I'll just duplicate this view and I will rename it and I'll call it Omni Export. And that's the view I typically set up. And then you can go into visibility and graphics, set up what you need. Now, 2D elements are not supported at this time. So lines, model lines, those will not come over. Only three-dimensional entities, and as you see them. So the export is pretty simple once the scene is set up the way you like it. You just go to the Omniverse tab. Make sure you're signed in. So right now I'm signed in as me into my server. I'm going to actually switch it from one of our to the local host. Click OK. And now you can see I'm signed into the local host. You have a couple buttons here. Send to view. That's going to just be an automatic push where you can just immediately see it. You don't have to worry about dialogues or saving files. It just makes a temporary file and then shows it to you in view. I'm gonna mostly focus on this workflow here, publish. I actually export as prop. This is the one I use most often, is the prop workflow. And then I'll get into live sync in a second and how that works. So if we just click export as prop, you're going to see the Omniverse dialog. And then at the top, you should see Omniverse. And that's actually the Nucleus server right there. And that's the one I'm logged into, which is my local host, which is basically just a Nucleus server that's sitting on the same computer that I'm working on right now. You can see I have a bunch of projects. So I'll actually just create a new folder, and I'll just call it Revit Export Sample, and click create folder, and then there we go. So I like to have a little bit of an organization, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm going to create another folder inside of there, and I'm just going to call it assets. And you can pre-populate all of these folders if you'd like. So yeah, assets. And inside of assets is where I'm going to actually export all of my data. So projects, Revit, samples, assets. And so now down here, we just got to give it a name. But before I do that, I'm going to show you some of the publish options that are important to understand. So if we click show publish options, it will open up another dialog. So typically keep this stuff the same. So this has to do with when you click send to view, like what the render size is and things like that. So one important thing to note is that I almost always set my Omniverse output as prop instead of project workflow. We can cover project workflow in another video, but right now I'm just going to talk about the prop workflow. And this is the one I find I use almost all the time. So once that's set to prop, the other things to just make note of is here on the right. So if you want to include all your cameras, and what that means is any of your 3D views will come in as actual views in Omniverse. So we can include cameras, and I'll show you what that's like. Enable lights, of course, it'll include all your lights, and vegetation. That really kind of means like RPC trees and things like that. So if you have RPC assets in there, it will go ahead and add those as well. Now, enable family data instancing. This is an interesting one, and for right now, I'm going to keep that unchecked. But to understand what that means is family data instancing means, so let's say you have a light. Um, Typically, like this project probably has about 100 recessed, 6-inch cans, which, is typical. So each one of those, instead of being its own geometry, would instance itself. Now, the great thing about that is it's way more memory efficient to instance them. The drawback to that is that when you're going to apply materials to an instanced object, all instances then will act and look the same. So especially for furniture, like if you put 3 of the same couches in the scene, but you wanted one to be one color and one to be the other color that we're going to override later in Omniverse, you're not going to be able to do that because it's an instance. So this is really great when you have a lot of the same families and they all have similar looks and feels to them. So I'm going to keep that off for right now. Now, material options, I always have both of these checked. That just means it's going to take the material mapping that's in Revit and the materials that are assigned to it, and it's going to convert them to MDL and Omniverse compliant materials. And it does a fairly good job of that, which is really great. And then, of course, one of my favorites is export BIM data. So it's going to put all of the properties that live on all of those objects into Omniverse, and they'll be accessible within Omniverse themselves. So those are the settings, and this is what I would recommend, especially if you're starting out, having it checked like this. And then click Save. And then those are my settings. So I'm going to call this Revit because I always like to know where it's coming from, because one of the things about Omniverse is we get to aggregate data from so many different sources, which is really beautiful. So in order for people who are working in a collaborative environment to understand where this data came from, I usually kind of append it with the software that it came from. Because in a larger project, you're going to see Revit and Rhino and Grasshopper and Max. You want to know where that source content came from. So Revit, you can call it sample project. And I'm going to export that. Now, the first time it exports, it's going to take a second. It's not actually that, it's pretty efficient, which is really, really nice. And it's done. So now I'm going to go to Create. So this is Omniverse Create. This is where we're going to go and make edits and view the file and add environments and override some materials and things like that. So if I go to my project, so down here we have the content browser, and there'll be plenty of additional videos that kind of go over the Create interface and things like that. This is mostly focused on, just bringing in that Revit content. So I'm going to go find my project, and it's going to be in the Revit export sample. You're going to see I have that folder assets. And in assets is going to be a materials folder that it creates and the sample project. Okay. Now we can directly open this USD, and I can do that right now. I'll open it. And it's gonna, if you look down to the lower right, it's building all the materials, and we're in RTX real-time mode. There's no environment or anything like that. The materials come in. I did not spend time mapping real materials in Revit. I'm gonna definitely do that in here. I find that more efficient. But you can do it in either place, and your material mappings definitely do come over. There was some like bamboo on things, and there was some brick map to stuff. It does come over. But the problem is, this file is the one linked to my Revit file. So if I make changes here right now and update this, there's going to be an issue when I push. All those changes are going to get overwritten. And we don't want that. We want all of our changes to maintain themselves throughout the life of the project and to be non-destructive. So I'm actually going to close this file because this is not the file I actually want to work in. And this is going to introduce you to the concept of layers and non-destructive layers. So right now we only have one layer, which is called the root authoring layer. And then underneath that is all our objects. And then just to kind of give you an idea, this is the name of the Revit project. So it just grabs the name of your project. Under that, you have all those cameras. So those are those 3D views that we were talking about before. They just come over. And geometry. Now, geometry is great. So the way we've decided to organize this is first by category. So you can see all of your Revit categories. All right. And casework, floors. And then if we go under, for instance, walls, you're going to see all of your wall types. So these are all of your Revit wall types. And then under that is all of the geometry that makes up. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 walls that are generic 8, right? So this is just a sample project, so it's not the nicest name things, but they're there. And, you know, everything's in there, plumbing fixtures, so all of my sinks and faucets and stuff like that, and all of the geometry that lives on it. So making the selection is actually quite easy. Okay. So we don't want to actually work in this file, coming back to that, is because I want to keep designing and updating stuff, but I also want to be working in here for materials, and I don't want one to clash with the other. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump back up to Revit Export Samples, and outside of Assets, I'm just going to create a file. Just right click in the browser, New USD File. And we like to call these world files. So these are where we compile all of our stuff together. So world, and I'm going to call this just main world. Okay, this is a blank USD file. So I'm going to go ahead and open that blank USD file. I'm not going to save anything I did there. And you're going to see there's literally nothing in the stage. And that's okay. That's what we want. If we go to layers, though, I want to show you that there's just one root authoring layer. But there's one little thing we have to do. The default, if we go to layers, we have to make sure the default up in a USD file is Y, but you know, Revit and Rhino and most of those work in Z up. So we just got to make that change. And you do that again, layers, click on root authoring layer, and then go to world axis down here in the properties panel and change that to Z. So the other thing to note is when you make a change to a layer, there's a save button. So you can see we can save the change that we just made. All right, so I'm in this blank file. And now I'm going to go to my assets, and I'm actually with the layers palette active. I'm going to go ahead and drag this file into this scene. So we're not importing it, we're referencing it. It's kind of like an XREF or a work session. So this is a file linked inside of that file. Now you still get to adjust it and edit it and change it. But the cool thing is, see how this says authoring layer? The cool thing is that all of those changes I'm about to do, or I'm going to show you how to do, aren't actually happening on my base Revit model. They're actually happening inside of this world file. So what that means is I can safely update this as I'm modeling in Revit without any of the changes I'm about to do getting overwritten. In fact, they're just going to always apply back down to the object. And this is the basic concept of USD non-destructive editing using layers. And this is really great. So now that that's my authoring layer, and I go back to my stage, you can see like now it's got that, you know, the brownstone as I had before in it. So the first thing I want to do is just add a sky. So go to skies. I'm going to just use the dynamic skies. So the dynamic skies let you change the sun. The rest of them are HDRIs. So I'm just going to stick with dynamic, and I'm going to right click and set to world. And now you're going to see I have some sunlight. By default, sun is not on. the sun controllers are not on. So I have them loaded because I've had them loaded before, but in order for you to get the sun controllers, they would be in extensions. And these are all of these beautiful extensions that not all of them are loaded. In fact, most of them are not loaded by default. So what you just want to do is type in sun, and then you're going to see sun study. And then just make sure that's enabled. And then because I always use this tool, I auto load it. So now I have that tool loads three things: set location, set date and time, like what day am I at, and the sun study tool itself, which is the hours of the day. So you can pick a time, you can say June 21st, and if you need to adjust the north orientation because north isn't up, or if you look at it from planet B, Y, you can do that. You can choose your Latin Lange so that you get those correctly. There's a bunch of defaults in here, but obviously you can just type in the number there. And more importantly, the sun study tool. So as I drag this, the clouds will move and the sun will change. And again, I'm just in ray trace mode. Ray trace mode is really great to work in. It's fast, it's efficient, it works really well. If you ever want to see it just more nicely rendered, just jump into path trace mode, or what we just abbreviate as PT. And you're going to see a much higher fidelity kind of render. The glass is going to look nicer. The lights are going to be on. So those lights actually come in. I'm going to go back to real time. Those lights actually come in from Revit as actual lights. So in the little eyeball, if you go show by type and we turn on lights, you can see there's little lights attached to all of those. In fact, there's a lot of lights in this scene. Those are all like lights that are coming from all the recessed cans, the fixtures, all of that kind of stuff. It does get a little distracting, so I do have it off most of the time. All right. So what's interesting to understand is now there's an environment, but that actual environment lives, if we go back to our layers, up in this this file here that I was working with, world main. That's where that is living. And you can see there's a save button there. So each layer actually has the save button. So what that means is if I start to edit materials, for instance, let's go inside this floor. So this floor, you can see, came in, it's the bamboo, wood stuff. So what I do is I typically just want to replace everything that's mapped with that material. So the easy way to do that is go click on the shader ball itself. And what you'll see is it'll actually highlight the shader there, right, in the stage. Right click on that, select bound objects, and that just basically says, all right, select everything with that material. And then simply go to the materials palette. I'm a big fan of, you have base, which has some really good stuff in it, but you also have another one called V2. I'll get into that in a second. So for this, I'm going to go with the ash planks. I think they look a little bit nicer. Right click, apply to selected. Now, the scale is a little bit off on that, obviously. So in order to fix that, it's very simple, is basically it's going to show up under looks, ash planks, and we have properties. There's a whole bunch of properties in there, but the one I'm just going to kind of get into is scale because I just want it to look better. There will be a materials video. So just change, sorry, we gotta go the other way. Nope, it is this way. That's probably too much. Let's say 2 by 2. Seems a little better. And then if you actually need it to be the other way, you can just rotate it. I actually might keep this at 1 and then the rest at 2 by 2. And so you can kind of see we can just instantly override that material. Now, again, we didn't change the material, we overrode the material, which is a really important difference. This kind of looks dark, by the way. I'll show you how to change that later. So we overrode the material, which means if we go back to our layers, you can see these little triangles, and that's the symbol for delta or change. I actually didn't do anything to this file. I just made a delta, as it's called in USD, and said, all right, this file is now, these objects now have this material on them. But it didn't actually change the material in the Revit project. And that's kind of really an important thing. So like, for instance, these chairs, they're not great. They didn't even have material on them from Revit. So I can go and I can make them, maybe I just want them to match my floor, and I'll make them ash wood, and I'll make this, maybe, I don't know what the seats are made out of. We can pick something for the seats too. Oop, that's not the seat. Maybe the whole thing is made out of ash. I don't know. I'll just do the whole. So since the one thing to note is if I right click on this and I click set to selected, it's going to make another copy of ash. So since ash is already in there, all I have to do is go here. You can see this is the material on the selected objects, materials on selected models. And you can just go down, and now you can start typing the word ash and go find the one we already made. And there it is. So that can be on there. And then that's not the greatest metal. So if we go to metals, let's do something a little bit, yeah. I don't want something so shiny. I want something a little bit less shiny. So again, then we can go and, kind of look at it in path trace mode. So in the render settings, you have common path trace, which is what I'm currently in. I'm going to go ahead and change the default samples to about 800, which is going to make it look a little bit nicer. I'm also going to go to post-processing, and for this case, I'm just going to turn on auto exposure. And then I'm going to change my adaptation speed. And then the white balance is basically how bright auto exposure is. And so it'll just adjust your lighting for you, whether you go inside or outside, to kind of keep that, hit that white point target. So that's how we kind of override materials. And it's, it's a very simple process. Again, now that ash is in my project already, I can select those and I can go back to ash. And then, to kind of coordinate, the stools should probably have that same metal, which was called steel blued. And now they have that on it. So the interesting to kind of note now is that all of these overrides are non-destructive now because they live in this layer here. You can see only the save is active here and not here because I'm not doing anything here. I'm basically saying I'm just going to kind of override this, and this is great. So what that means is we can now stay nicely connected to Revit. So things might look a little bit small. Sorry, I do not need my project browser opened for this, and I definitely don't need my properties browser open for this. So I will hide both of those. So we just have a little bit more screen real estate. What I'm going to do is, you can see that this got auto-populated, the live sync, because that's my export sample project, right? I'm going to turn on live sync here. So now it's streaming out of Revit. And then I want to tell Create that I also want to listen to the updates. So you have to turn it on both sides. So again, root layer. The thing I actually want to stream is the Revit sample project. So I'm just going to click the little cloud next to that. That's in the layers palette. So click that little palette. And now we're actively live syncing that layer, and only that layer. So you can selectively live sync different layers. And I'm now going to go inside, I'm going to quickly go, here. I'm just going to quickly hide that. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go over here and I'm going to quickly hide this as well. And I'm going to hide this. So temporary hide isolate, that's obviously not going to live sync. Which is important. So then you can go and edit stuff. So if you wanted, you can move the stool around. And there you go, the stool moves. So these are now synced up. You know, you can copy the stool if you want. And it's going to make a copy. It's not going to have the material on it because it's a new object. We'd have to add that override as well. And you're going to get a new stool, and that's it. Now, there is a way to override this so that like that whole category gets overridden. But, you know, basically we would just have to go ahead and just say, all right, so that also has ash. And that has blue. There will be a deeper dive into material overrides as another video about weaker and stronger than descendants and things like that can show you how to kind of do that at a more global scale. But just know that, you know, simple things like you can grab, you know, all of a particular type of mullion, right? So I can go and grab all of a particular type of mullion or all of a particular type of object, or select by material. So like this aluminum material, right? Like it's not the nicest. So if I look at the brownstone geometry, I can go just basically grab that material, aluminum, select bound objects, and go ahead and make it like, I don't know, like a nice, like dark anodized material. And then all my mullions are going to update and change, which is really nice. Okay, so I don't want to get to it. So with LiveSync now, you can go ahead, you can model, you can make changes, you can zoom around, you can do whatever you want. And all of these changes are just going to update with the material overrides on top of them. You know, go ahead, you can change the counter, just move it, adjust its length, whatever you need to do. It doesn't really matter. It's not just transforms that change. It's like, it's, right, it's a family. My bad. So, you know, you can edit a property or whatever and change it, and that's it. So that's how you get started inside of Revit. Biggest takeaways, again, remember, don't edit the original Revit file. Always have a file that these things are embedded in, and use layering to your advantage. So you can live sync. So somebody can be adjusting materials while somebody else is finishing the Revit geometry. It can all be pushed, it can all get live synced, and it all is a very collaborative experience and a non-destructive one, which is great. So all of these edits and changes will just go through and just work. So again, let's make that like nice shiny chrome. And that's it. Now I get a nice shiny chrome sync. Maybe I want to make this sync also chrome. I don't know why I want a chrome sync, but we can have a chrome sync. And again, if it looks a little dark, just go to your white point scale and just, there we go. And we can adjust the lighting. And then again, with auto lighting, once you go outside, it's not going to kind of get blown out. It's going to try and adjust accordingly. And that's how we get started inside of Revit.